Thank you, Lauren. So good to be here today. The First Mile is an organization that we are part of at work, where we work to bring full transparency to the first mile of recycling supply chain. So we work with about 2,000 waste collectors across the globe, and that is just a fraction of the millions of informal waste collectors who are out there doing the work of our everyday heroes in making sure that waste is collected and not in the waste streams. So I'm really excited today to have a chance to talk about the work that they do, who have been so much not in the spotlight as much as we like to see, given the heroic work and the important work that they take on a day-to-day basis. But I have two leaders in this field today who have been in this work for many, many years as well, who have done incredible research and made incredible actions towards the improvement of the supply chain. So I'll introduce both of them. We do have 20 minutes to address a really big topic here today. So we want to let you know that we do welcome follow-on conversations with you. There is a link pinned at the top of the chat that includes some information about all of our work and our contact information, along with a link to donate should you choose to decide to support our work in waste collection as well. So the first panelist we have here today is Keiran Smith from Mr. Green Africa. At Mr. Green Africa, the future of recycling will be changed by alleviating the marginalization, suffering, and large-scale disadvantage of informal waste pickers and their communities. Mr. Green Africa has designed a human-centered business model that illustrates shared value at its best. Our second panelist here today is Bharati Chaturvedi from Chintan. Chintan reduces waste and consumption, manages solid and electronic waste, and advocates around materials, waste, and consumption. It uses waste as a tool to fight poverty, child labor, gender-based violence, and exclusion and climate change while creating green livelihoods. So, Bharati, I'll start with you today. I'd love for you to help us frame who are we talking about here today. You've done incredible research in this field over the last few decades and have an organization that serves thousands and thousands of waste collectors across India. Help us set the stage here. Who are we talking about and address the challenges that your micro entrepreneurs face in the informal recycling system as well, please.
Well, I think we're talking about some of the most marginal people in our cities. In our cities today, all over the world, 1% of the population in the developing world is a person who's recycling our waste. And what's really interesting about that is that that might be a trend that's spreading to the more developed world as well after COVID. But what we are seeing is these people are stigmatized, but they really know their waste. They know what will sell, they pick it up, they sell it, they send their children to school. And in our part of the world, in South Asia and parts of Southeast Asia, we find that they actually do earn minimum wages, but they work in terrible conditions. So they pay a huge price for their health. And that is, I think, the biggest challenge, because they are people who today, as we speak, these are people who are picking up used masks lying on beaches and on open places. These are people who are still going, despite COVID, and going doorstep collection and picking up waste. These are people who are also the frontline workers fighting climate change, because if you just go on mining materials and if you just go on dumping them in the oceans, you're going to have a huge problem. We already are, but they're mitigating that through their work. And yet nobody recognizes them as the climate warriors, as the environmentalists that they truly are. And I'm really talking about 1.5 million to 2 million people on this planet.
Great, thank you so much. And we are at the core of this addressing not just environmental justice and environmental issues here, but social justice issues as well, right? So Keiran, I'm going to turn it over to you. Tell us a little bit, in a great piece that you wrote a couple of years ago, you talked about the problem that you're helping to address and the economics behind it and how that ties together at the systemic level. Can you help us shed a light on that?
Sure. First of all, thank you for having me here. Hello, everyone. Yeah, I think the essential element when we founded Mr. Green Africa was really about the combination of the sustainability element of creating a supply chain, a functioning supply chain that really is strong and self-sufficient, while including this informal market. And we really didn't reinvent the wheel. What we did is we copied from the fair trade approaches that we see in the banana, tea, and coffee industry, where smallholder farmers get included into this value chain and basically try to be given a better working conditions, environment, but also fairer prices and transparency. So really, this is, I think, the core of our model and the core that what we want to solve here and what we want to touch in this conversation today is that if we create solutions to tackle the waste or the plastic pollution problem, it should be really including this informal market and making them an essential part of the solution.
And how do we do that, Keiran? How can we include the informal market, informal waste collection network into this market, into the system? How are you guys doing it at Mr. Green Africa?
Well, I think there's definitely many moving parts to this, but on what I would split it up in three major parts. The first part that I would use is the inclusion part. So how can we truly make this informal market part of the supply chain? And one element to do that successfully is really moving them from informal to formal. Can we put them on a growth trajectory? Can we formalize themselves as with IDs, a simple thing like an ID, but all the way to sort of really creating a record of financial inclusion, etc., to really be part of the private sector. The second part is the middle element that really is the processing. So we hear a lot of times, we hear corporates who are looking for PCR, we hear them say, we want to buy PCR, but it's not available. And so bridging that gap from collectors who collect plastics, bringing that through a value chain, a supply chain that converts this plastic waste into high quality PCR is another essential bit. And then the offtake, right? Once we have a high quality PCR, bringing that to the customer, like a corporate who wants to go, who already uses PCR or wants to go on a journey to use PCR. How do we link that back to them and really create that transparency and connect these dots in between? And that's what we also in our promise as Mr. Green Africa say is like every ton you buy from Mr. Green Africa, we can show you directly where this the income of that is trickling down to. And so democratizing this value chain is really the essence of Mr. Green Africa. And I think doing that on scale is one of the bullets of providing a solution. I don't say we're the silver bullet, but I'm definitely claiming that we're one of the models that can work, and especially in emerging markets where we have a lot of waste pickers and informal players that deserve to be treated better and included into supply chains like ours.
Thank you. And Bharati, if you don't mind building on top of that and sharing a little bit about the price volatility that you are seeing, that we are all seeing these days, and what important role, critical role that brands and consumer brands could play a part into all of this too.
So, I'll start with just a small example of how it can work. So we, for example, work with well over 15,000 waste pickers. And what we've seen through now the prices were falling because India also banned all imports of all forms of waste. But what we're seeing is currently the prices in the last 1 year have fallen, say, about 40% on an average of plastics as well as cardboard and paper. And so we're seeing that when you're actually working with three levels, one is policy. Chintan does a lot of policy advocacy, and we do that by measuring and monitoring and getting data from the ground and building that, taking that to India's top policymakers and helping either create a policy around it or create a policy that will be more inclusive of waste pickers. And the second, of course, is brands and corporates. So and of course, the third is municipalities, because all waste is legally owned and the business of municipalities. Now, the way that brands work when there is a policy that tells them what they're supposed to do, and often that policy, at least in India, has been developed with the help of both groups like ours. We have actually help create that policy, but also taken inputs from the brand. And where we find brands really work well is because in our case, the informal sector is anyway supplying all the materials. The fact we would have so much more plastic in our rivers and in our oceans if we didn't have the informal sector globally, not just for India. And we find that when brands come in, then low value waste, which is still going into the rivers, into the oceans, that is taken out and there's money in that. And that difference is that money for low value waste because of brands has actually been kept steady and people are still earning. And interestingly, right now, for example, for all kinds of low value plastics, that is the one kind of plastic that has kept its pricing in the places where it is being sold and where the brands have come in. And where the brands have not come in, it's going into the ocean because they are actually paying under extended producer responsibility for its collection, and they're paying the same amount. So I believe that so groups like ours that work with all these numbers of people are actually being able to leverage that relationship with brands. And in a post-COVID time, actually for us, we have 75,000 cases yesterday in India. So it's not really post-COVID, it's peaking COVID. In those times, we're being able to provide people with a sort of livelihood, certainly a decline in income, but still a steady income of some kind that helps them tide this absolutely unbelievable path. And the difference is, frankly, when you look at people we're working with and you look at people nobody is working with, the biggest difference is that the children are dropping out of school and becoming child laborers, whereas people we're working with, they're somehow managing to keep kids in school because there's that little bit of wriggle room. And of course, there's huge support from organizations, not just Chintan, but several others. And they're being able to keep those kids in place, provide them with food and things like that. And that too is something that's coming in from brands who recognize the importance of this sector and the importance of not letting them fall off, the cliff in these very, very trying times.
And that's a follow-up to that. When there is price volatility, when that price does drop all of a sudden, which it happens, what happens to the waste collectors? What happens to your micro entrepreneurs?
Well, three things happen. First of all, if the waste drops and it doesn't peak, they stop collecting that waste because the reason for the drop is really important. Usually, it's market fear. So, for example, when there was an announcement in India that single-use plastics would soon be phased out, it was August of last year. Suddenly, all kinds of single-use plastics, which were low-value plastics, just weren't being recycled. So that is one. And so then they lose that income, but they also operate in very uncertain conditions, which means they're not able to get informal loans. They don't know they don't pick up certain kinds of waste. On top of that, what happens with waste pickers is also uncertainty can be very, very difficult for them because it means that they don't know whether they can repair the house, whether they can invest in their children, whether they can invest in a surgery, because all of that costs money and social security is very limited across India. Very few cities and very few pockets of cities have organized waste pickers. So essentially a price volatility for them basically means that they have to tighten their belts, and gender outcomes are very, very prominent. Women eat less, girls eat less, girls are pulled out of special classes for maths and science. And so basically they're very, very gendered impacts, and that actually contributes to exacerbating poverty. So I think it's very important to keep steady pricing, at least of the most common items and including of plastics. But that has to be also backed up with a pretty substantial system of social security, whether it's identity cards, which groups like us give along with municipalities, or whether it is improved healthcare.
Thank you. And at the First Mile, the work that we do with about 2,000 waste collectors across Haiti, Honduras, and in Taiwan, together we've collected over 100 million bottles out of the waste streams and supplied them to brands like HP, CPI Card Group, Puma. Many of these brands have also incorporated us into their strategic giving strategy so that we could fund projects to end child labor, to ensure that relocations out of landfills can take place for a lot of our waste collectors, to ensure that we can respond to COVID during this time. In addition to that, that they're also helping us to provide that steady pricing. Keiran, we talk a lot about offload agreements and how that ought to work. Can you address that for us, please?
Yeah, I mean, there's many moving parts in this topic, right? So because of time, let me dive into an element of the origin of recycled material has always been the pricing structure, the pricing finding of it has always been linked to virgin material pricing. Yeah, so there are a lot of external macro factors playing into this, and then top of that, we're fighting with PCR, with a perception of like PCR can never be as good as the quality of virgin. So that's why the PCR is always packed, or has been in the past, has been packed to virgin material. So and it's a fact that oil prices are volatile, therefore virgin prices are volatile, and so therefore also the recycled plastic materials are volatile. So this is extremely linked to a market that actually doesn't have anything to do with recycled material or PCR. And so we're actually not playing in the level playing field here, because the cost to collect, to convert, and create a high quality PCR is a different cost than to sort of mine the resource, convert into virgin plastic and offer that into the market. Different scale, different type of process. So I think what is really important here to highlight is that if we find a way to really detach ourselves from these price volatilities and really create PCR in its own as its own commodity, I think we can really have a big system change and systematic change into the whole spectrum of when we talk about PCR and who are the players who supply this PCR, right? And then, of course, it needs a transparent value chain. It needs to be an impactful value chain. It needs to be an inclusive value chain that considers the people who are part of collection. And I think I really close with that on that point, is that companies and corporates, they need to ask themselves the question of, to get on a PCR journey, is the question of, is our procurement strategy fit and ready to be also an impact-driven procurement strategy? And what do I mean by that is I'm not even asking or talking about a higher cost than virgin material, but what if it is at the same cost, at the same price levels, then with a discounted price level versus the virgin? And those are, that comes to the fundamental of how the strategies are built in the procurement systems of different buyers, manufacturers, and of course the customers who are looking for PCR.
Thank you. We have a ton of questions in the chat, and Heather, I'm gonna kick it off to you for a question from the audience.
Yes, there are a ton of questions, and many of them have been sort of addressed already. This is a wild card, though. Could reusable packaging help solve the volatility of value for this economy, this informal economy? Would this help, hurt? How would it affect it?
Well, I think the reusable packaging will definitely help to solve the plastic pollution problem. Now the question is, okay, reusable. So does the consumer now reuse the packaging? Does that mean now it will have a picker has less to be collected and part of a value chain? I think there's no one silver bullet. Reusable packaging is great. I think it's also part of the future, but it's only one part of the solution. We will still have a lot of packaging that will needs to go back into a loop, and in that collection system for this loop, I think there's still a lot of work and efforts to be done on how we can include and solve this. So reusable packaging, I'm a big advocate for it, but it's not the silver bullet, unfortunately.
Bharati, any additions to that?
Well, I would definitely agree there. And I also believe that we should not shy away from solutions thinking, oh, now what will happen to the waste pickers because they'll get less plastics. Because in fact, even the waste pickers don't want the next generation to be waste pickers. We work with 2,300 children full time. And you'll be amazed at the way these children, I mean, they don't even have proper internet and they're studying. In the middle of COVID, they're sitting in the monsoon and they're studying outside. And so they don't want to be waste, because what we have to look at is safe, clean jobs. And there's loads of other kinds of waste to be collected, recycled, whether we're talking of compostables or whether we're talking of safe collection of any other kind of waste. So I really believe that we also have to keep an eye on future jobs and the state of green jobs as we go ahead in this solution.
Thank you. Yes, and it goes back to the theme of inclusivity here that Keiran's mentioned many times as well. In thinking about a new system and new changes and new ways of doing this, inclusivity still needs to be a main theme here. And we encourage everybody to think about what an impact-driven procurement strategy looks like, what it means to be inclusive every step of the way in the supply chain. And if there are new jobs that comes out of recycling, that comes out of a new way of doing things, that ought to include the waste collection network as well. So there are ways to do that. And we're open to having more conversations about this with you and talking about how we're doing our work. But that's it for our time today. And 20 minutes goes by really, really fast. I want to
very fast.
My co-panelists here for today for their feedback and insights. I want to again point you back to the link that we have pinned at the top with some information about our work and ways to engage with us. And I want to thank also GreenBiz, Lauren, Sarah, Heather, Danny, everybody there for their incredible work this week and for putting a spotlight on this topic that is so important in the supply chain work that undoubtedly cannot happen without all of the waste collectors who are out there. So thank you so much. Lauren, take it away.
Thank you also from my side.
Thank you. Thank you so much to GreenBiz. Thank you, Viv.